Welcome to Focus Today. I'm your host, Perry Atkinson. Hey, earlier we had a chance to talk to Scott Jorgensen. He's a legislative aide up at the Oregon State Capitol, giving us a little bit of a behind-the-scenes look of this last session. Well, our special guest today is Scott Jorgensen. He's a legislative assistant and staffer up there at the state capitol. He's an author, former reporter, so he's a recovering reporter. We'll forgive him for that. Anyway, his latest book, On the Cusp of Chaos, and we want to talk to him about some of the things that are going on at the Capitol. There's a picture of it there on the screen. Scott, good to see you, buddy. How you doing?
Well, good. It's been a lot less hectic than you're used to seeing me.
Nice to see a smile on your face. By the way, your book is available at Amazon.com, right?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I think few don't realize how hectic the Capitol work can really be, and you've been doing this for quite a while.
Yeah, and I started, my first session was back in 2005 as an aide to then Representative Dennis Richardson. So he actually emerges as one of the central characters in this book because of that and because of his subsequent run for governor.
Right.
In fact, I just spoke with him the other day, and it was great because the day before Kitzhaber's resignation, I called him just to check in to see how he was doing. And he was at the employment office in White City volunteering, helping people find jobs.
Right.
And so he's still doing that, and that's been a lot of his efforts since the end of the election and his stint in the legislature.
So are we really on the verge of chaos up there?
Well, it's there and everywhere else in the state too, and the title refers to a lot of the tensions that exist there and the divisions between urban and rural. That's one of the big themes the years that I spent reporting here in Southern Oregon and seeing what it looks like here versus up at the Capitol. And so the book goes back and forth. Half of the chapters are from Salem, and then half are from literally everywhere else in the state. So there's chapters from Grants Pass, Cave Junction, Estacada, Pendleton.
Wow.
And it's, you know, one moment you're on the outside looking in saying, okay, we've got catastrophic wildfires burning out here. Are they doing anything about it in Salem? And then you're up in Salem and you say, well, our chief executive, who's supposed to be taking care of these, is too busy worrying about trying to avoid prison, deleting emails off of state servers to do anything about these wildfires.
You know, I think it's so interesting because I'm kind of like you from the news background and reporting and things like that, and I listen to a lot of talk radio, probably to my psychological demise. But what's so interesting to me is that conservative talk radio is always complaining about what the legislature is doing, especially when it's in the control primarily of the Democrats in the House and the Senate. And I thought, well, wait a minute, time out. Those people are doing exactly what they were elected to do. And the problem is that we don't get behind candidates early enough to get them elected so that the conservatives can have a majority in the House and the Senate. So we have a Democratic governor, we got a Democratic controlled House and Senate, and it's just runaway liberalism at a level that we've never seen before. Mixed in the middle of that, we went through a very embarrassing gubernatorial resignation. I can't imagine what it was like up there.
Well, and you know, obviously during the session I do updates here, and I imagine I looked haggard at times because those are long days.
Yeah.
And it's a million miles a minute, which is the name of one of the chapters that kind of starts off the 2015 session. And there is a disconnect. And that's why it's important that the citizens be involved in the process. And you have some groups of folks who are involved only when it comes to elections, and some that are only involved during sessions.
Right.
I mean, for example, the background check bill that passed.
Yeah.
We heard from all kinds of people throughout the state. We said, well, that's great, but where were you a few months ago when people were campaigning for office?
Right.
Your involvement at that point might have swung some of these races.
Are there any, and I want to say this respectfully, but are there any Democrats that literally think outside the box of what really is good for the citizens? I mean, that just doesn't go with the liberal bent. Do you see any hope there?
There is, and you know, similarly, my background as a reporter, I'd worked with a lot of Democratic legislators, including some of the ones here locally, like Alan Bates and Peter Buckley. I knew him back in 2002 before he was a representative. And that's one of the things that's mentioned in the book is kind of these relationships that people build over time. For example, we had a bill to help one of the small businesses in Grants Pass that was getting hammered with retroactive taxes on a piece of equipment that, and they had never acquired the taxes.
Wow.
A previous owner of the business equipment did. In fact, they're listeners, so they're probably listening.
Wow.
And I had to reach out to the chairman of the committee, who I'd worked with on a statewide ballot measure back in 2012, to get it passed and through the process. So the process does work and can work. And that was where, as you know, I'd interviewed Vic Atiyeh, our last Republican governor, prior to his passing last year. And he had told me that his favorite memory in the legislature was being a member of the phone booth caucus, where there were so few Republicans in the Senate that they could fit in a phone booth.
Yeah.
And he said, despite that, we still got things done. So at the most frustrating moments of the session, I would just remind myself of that and think about that and say, well, we have twice as many members as he did back then, and he didn't complain. And what a lot of people don't realize is that the vast majority of the bills that pass are non-controversial.
Right.
They pass out of committee unanimously and bipartisan, and
the way they go.
Pass both chambers on broad votes, but you hear the most about the handful of controversial bills that come up.
How hard was it for, whether they're Democrats or Republican, how hard was it to get through the resignation of the governor?
Well, it was a big, huge distraction at the beginning of the session, because you had TV news crews roaming the halls looking for anyone to talk to about it. And you'd be getting calls and texts from people all over the state saying, what's happening? Is he going to resign? And meanwhile, people inside the building are asking people outside the building the same thing.
Yeah.
And what's sad is that we're the only state in the nation that doesn't have a process in place for impeachment. So if John Kitzhaber hadn't resigned his position, he would have still been governor that whole time, and would still be governor, and there wouldn't have been that mechanism to remove him from office, despite everything that's happened.
Let's face it, he got reelected 4 times, and he's only into his 4th term weeks, and all this come crumbling down. The residual effect. Is the state in trouble over this, in the sense of not only what happened with Cover Oregon, which was a mess, and that now has got ensuing lawsuits going, but what happens to a governor? What happens to Sylvia? From your perspective, what do you see happening there?
It seems to me that they have her dead to rights on income tax evasion. And the wheels of justice turn slowly, especially when you have this level and this scope of investigations happening, and multiple investigations. We're like investigations on top of investigations.
Right.
And I don't think any of it will come to a head in time to influence the 2016 elections.
Okay.
But I think by 2017, 2018, that's when it will really become obvious the full scope of what happened. And
we all kind of know what happened, obviously, and the buying and selling of influence and things like that. But there was something else that was kind of a technical thing for me. He declared her first lady, and they weren't married. And I get all that, even though I don't agree with it morally, but I understand that. But is that what caught her? Because had she just remained girlfriend, that would have been another issue. But because she was declared first lady, now, did she become property of the state, so to speak?
Well, that was one of the things we were trying to work on legislatively during the session, was to clarify the role of First Lady and what it meant and what the restrictions would be on that. But what's obvious is that she abused her position and used it for personal gain, and didn't necessarily tell the IRS that she made as much as she did off of it.
Right.
And actually, I just read a report the other day. It was this 50-page report, and it was compiled through public records requests across multiple states. And it details, they had a whole section about Kitzhaber and Hayes in there. And it talks about President Obama and his clean energy plan, and the involvement of Michael Bloomberg and Tom Steyer and all these billionaires, and the fact that they basically developed an organization similar to Organizing for America, which was his campaign arm. And what was obvious through the emails they discovered was that these folks didn't want a lot of this to become public, and went out of their way to do it. There was stonewalls from multiple states with records requests, and they even had some instances where states would deny that emails existed, except they already had the emails because they'd come across from requests from other states.
Wow.
And so because of that, the Oregon Republican Party is now doing a statewide listening tour on transparency and government accountability. and the first event was in Oregon City in early September, and they're going to be doing it here in Medford in late September on the 23rd, I believe, and Dennis Richardson's actually going to be one of the panelists, and he'll have a lot to say about it.
I would imagine so. All right, let us take a quick break. When we come back, there's a lot of other things to talk about. We got a governor that we didn't elect. What does that mean, and what could maybe mean in the future? We'll be right back with Scott Jorgensen in just a minute.
Hi, I'm Paulina, and I work at theDove TV. Did you know that when you support theDove TV, you have a profound impact, not only in our community, but around the world? It's your continued support that takes the inspiration and hope in the programs we produce and makes them available to the thousands of people who are watching these videos online every week. Help bring encouragement and hope to our valley and beyond by making a secure online donation today at our website, thedove.us.
Okay, we're back with Scott Jorgensen. He is a legislative staffer up there, and you work for Senator?
Well, I work for Senator Doug Whitsitt as his chief of staff, and I've enjoyed it thoroughly. Yeah. And he's, over the years, become kind of the voice of rural Oregon.
He certainly has. And by the way, if you're not getting their emails and their newsletters, I should say, what do they do? Scott, what should they do?
You go to the legislative website, that's www.oregonlegislature.gov, and it's very user-friendly, and you pull up his webpage, and you can subscribe to the newsletter, and we put them out every week, and it covers a variety of topics.
Yeah. Doug is a great conservative thinker, and one of the warriors up there in behalf of not only rural Oregon, but conservative in general. So support him. And go get the website and the newsletter. All right, Scott, we got a governor we didn't elect. How would you rate her performance so far, Governor Brown?
She hasn't made any drastic missteps, and she's actually worked in pretty good faith with our office. That bill I mentioned earlier to help that small business in Grants Pass, when she was Secretary of State, we'd worked with her office, the corporate division, in putting that together. And she gave us her word that I will help advance this. And within 24 hours of her being sworn in as governor, there was a public hearing and work session on the bill. So she did right by us. But she has that challenge where she's viewed, despite the fact that she's held statewide office for a while as Secretary of State, as being a Portland Democrat. And so the impetus is on her to demonstrate that she understands the issues facing people in other parts of the state, including here.
Right.
And that much remains to be seen.
Okay. You think she's going to run?
I'm positive she's going to run.
Okay, because she's probably the Democrats' best hope right now, right?
Yes, and it's easier to run as an incumbent, and there's a lot to be said for the power of incumbency, and John Kitzhaber certainly played that out in his third term when he was running for his fourth term. Because as much as people complain and say that they want change, a lot of times when it comes down to it and you're given the option to go with someone different, they usually don't.
What is the actual, some people have asked, well, she's up for re-election in 2016, so the way the rule is written, she just takes over until the next election, right? She doesn't take over his term, she just takes over until the next election.
And in that sense, she was a placeholder, and then we'll have another gubernatorial election in 2018.
Okay. So it's 2016, and then she's got to run again in 2018?
That's correct.
Wow. So that's pretty interesting. Unless somebody else wins, and then they pick up a 4-year term, right?
Well, I think it has to reset.
Yeah.
So we're going to have back-to-back gubernatorial elections no matter what.
We still seem to be not attracting businesses to the state of Oregon, which is really sad. I mean, I tracked a couple of them. Say Tesla is an example, ends up in Reno, Nevada. They could have easily been in Southern Oregon, or they could have easily come here. I mean, we have the infrastructure for it. We have the infrastructure for some large high-tech companies here. But when you look at the cost of doing business here, they just say, sorry, we're going someplace else. You see any hope for that, Scott?
Do I? Well, for example, one of the first bills that was passed in the legislative session was low carbon fuel standards. And that was passed over the objection of every chamber of commerce in the state, just about, and vehemently, publicly objected to. And the first day of the session, they had hearings on it, and they just rammed it right on through. And
And isn't that the bill that was the controversial center of Sylvia Hayes?
It's all tied together.
So is it possible that thing could be overturned based upon the case, the lawsuit?
Well, I think it would have to be done legislatively when it all happens, but that policy was mentioned directly and specifically in the sweeping federal subpoena that was issued to him and her and all these different agencies and members of his administration and agency heads. It was all there.
So, and I was kind of pounding the table when that was coming down because it happened right at the beginning of the session. I don't think the smoke cleared from the opening bell, and I was disappointed in President Courtney for pushing this thing because I thought, no, wait a minute, this thing is under investigation. I mean, this is the center of the controversy of Sylvia Hayes, and he's pushing the bill through, and it got through the Senate and through the House, and of course then here comes Governor Brown signed it.
Well, and it was part of a national effort too, and documents have been recovered through public records requests that show that this was part of a national effort spearheaded by the Obama administration for the Clean Power Plan, and it's a 55-page report that's online right now, and it talks about the involvement of Michael Bloomberg and Tom Steyer and these billionaires who are hoping to influence this policy, and it was a very interesting read, but to me it highlights that need for accountability and transparency that we just don't have right now.
Let me say to our viewers and listeners, Scott has authored a book. It's entitled On the Cusp of Chaos. There's a picture of it there on the screen by Scott Jorgensen. And here's what you need to do. Go to Amazon.com and order the book. It's a fascinating book because it kind of gives you like a behind-the-scenes look of how the process happens. I don't think the only reason I'm familiar with it is we've had a son up there for 14 years, and being a former chairman of the party, you kind of figure these things out. But I don't think the average citizen knows until a controversial bill pops up, and then all of a sudden they're interested in something. And almost at that point, it's too late. It's not that it can't be turned around, but so often they yell and scream. And so this book will help you to understand the process. And it's a lot more complicated than you think. And yet, I think there's hope in there as to how the system really works and at what level you should be getting involved. And I can't emphasize that enough. So go to Amazon.com, On the Cusp of Chaos by Scott Jorgensen, and grab that. All right, Scott, cover Oregon. A huge failure. Millions of dollars of Fed dollars involved. Where is the battle now? I mean, is the Feds going to sue the state? What's going to happen from your perspective? What's going to happen with this?
Well, we have lawsuits between Oracle and the state that are going to go on for a while, and it's become public now that members of Kitzhaber's campaign staff were very much involved in this. The General Accounting Office of Congress is looking into it, and campaign staff was coaching witnesses who then appeared before Congress to testify on it. And the book actually starts with some of this. I was reporting in Estacada back in December 2012, and that town reminded me of a lot of the towns I reported on around here, Rogue River, Cave Junction, where I'm driving by abandoned mills, and the schools have declining enrollment and struggling economies. But the outgoing state representative for Estacada brought this issue up in committee in December 2012 because he had a background in web development. His name's Patrick Sheehan. He's a friend of mine. He's actually the guy who introduced me to Vicatia, right? And he had gotten live product demonstrations from a company that built these kinds of websites, and they could have customized existing software.
I was going to say there's some templates out there. They
could have licensed it for $6 million, customized it for another $6 million, and had a functioning website for $12 million. Instead, they spent $300 million for a website that never worked. And they're still spending money hooking us up to the federal exchange and all that. It was all unnecessary. What was most disturbing about watching that committee hearing was the flippant attitude that state officials had. Because as it is right now, one of the pieces of ethics reform legislation we were looking at doing was requiring or enabling these people to be under oath in committee. Because as it is right now, agency heads can misrepresent the truth in those circumstances and have no consequences for it.
And they weren't under oath?
They weren't under oath. They're never under oath.
Wow.
And Patrick Sheehan asked these guys about it and said, why are you building a website from scratch when you can license software and customize it? And they, oh, well, that doesn't do what we need it to do. Right, because the $300 million that they spent on a website that didn't work didn't do it either. But he said, look, I'm worried about us wasting money. And their attitude was essentially, well, it's fine, because if we run out of money, we'll ask the federal government for more money. But we're at the point now where the federal government may very well ask for some of that money back. And the thing is that the 2017 session is going to be very difficult financially. Even if we're still in a point of economic recovery, ODOT's budget is in shambles, and it's unsustainable right now. Because of the Medicaid expansion that we did through Cover Oregon, the feds have covered most of that, but they're going to start ramping it down. But we're going to have to come up with billions upon billions of dollars. And in a way, that might be Kitzhaber's ultimate legacy. We're going to be paying for the mistakes of his administration for years to come.
There was a bill many years ago that, and I'm just going to paraphrase and simplify it, that would have given the, actually would have made the legislature to begin to bring back into alignment what we would call administrative oversight. Let's take a look at these agencies. They're making rules that are actually laws. They're charging fees and services without any kind of oversight whatsoever. And surprisingly enough, that bill that failed, that ballot measure failed. But it would seem to me that we're now at that point, if we don't reel in the size of some of these agencies and the bureaucratic arrangements of some of these agencies and some of their fees and their laws and regulations, we're in trouble. And I don't know, wouldn't that be a campaign thing that a governor could do and say, hey, wait, if I become governor, I'm going to form a committee, we're going to look at every agency, and we're going to do some whacking here.
And this is something we've looked at and that my boss, Senator Whitsit's been looking at for a while. We did a newsletter about it a few months back, and we started by asking the state archivist, how many administrative rules are there? And her answer offhand was, I don't know. Let me get back to you. So they didn't even know how many administrative rules they were. And we finally found out, and we averaged it out over time, and found out that they basically adopt a new administrative rule every 11 minutes or something. I mean, it was outrageous. And you're thinking, you're a small business owner, and you're trying to comply with the law, but they're just kind of making it up as they go along. And when I first returned to the Capitol in 2013, I was with the House Republican office. And there were times in caucus meetings where our members would say, why, they would be frustrated, openly frustrated. Why are we having to pass laws to tell these agencies to do things that they should be doing anyway, that they're supposed to be doing anyway? You also have it happen where you pass a law telling an agency, hey, you can't do this, you need to stop. And then the agency passes its own administrative rule and says, oh, well, we don't have to because we passed our own rule saying that we can keep doing this. And we've been dealing with that with an issue involving the Department of Revenue. They came up with a creative definition for residency regarding military personnel in this state, and they were trying to hit these guys with retroactive tax bills, saying, oh, Colonel so-and-so, you owe us $20,000 because according to our calculations, you've been a resident of Oregon this whole time.
Wow.
And we slipped language into a tax bill to tell the Department of Revenue to stop that, to give a clearer definition of residency. It passed, and they were still doing it because they said, well, yeah, the law passed, but it's not officially codified yet.
All right, so am I hearing you say that if the legislature passed let's say an administrative oversight bill that says that the legislature now has complete oversight of all the agencies, and we're going to put a freeze. You can't hire, you can't spend, you can't do any more policies unless it comes through the legislature for approval. Are you saying that they could basically thumb their nose at you and pass another agency rule that would make that law go away?
Under the current leadership, that's what we're kind of seeing at the federal level and the state level, was what does the rule of law really mean? This was an education for me. And here we are working on laws, making laws. And administrative rules don't go through the same process that the laws that we pass through the legislature do. They carry the same force of weight. And it all starts at the top. And that's where, for example, when Vic Atiyeh was governor, his background was in retail. He had to earn your business. And so he brought that customer service culture to these agencies. That culture is long since passed, and we've had decades of one-party rule since then.
Yeah.
And the emphasis isn't on serving the customer, serving the taxpayers, it's on serving the state.
One quick question, we're out of time. One quick question. Do you think that the spirit that's in the country right now that is looking at non-beltway people, i.e. the Trumps and the Carsons and the Fiorionis and things like that, do you think that that spirit's in Oregon, that there could be a turnover this not coming election cycle?
Well, the one candidate who is going to run for governor on the Republican side is this gentleman by the name of Bud Pierce. And he's a doctor from Salem, and he's putting his money where his mouth is. He's putting, $250,000 of his own money into his campaign. And he's a man who's never run for office, never held office.
So that kind of spirit's out there. All right, let me say to our viewers and listeners again, the name of Scott's book is entitled On the Cusp of Chaos. There's a picture of it on the screen. Let me encourage you to get a copy of it. You can go to Amazon.com and you can get a copy. It's a great resource and a good insight of what's happening at the legislature. Thank you for your service, buddy, and keep up the good work, and look forward to talking to you many times in the future.
Absolutely.
All right, coming up next, we had a chance to talk to Marion County Circuit Court Judge Vance Day. As you know, he's in the news, and we'll share that time together with you coming up next here on Focus Today.